This is part 10 of Federalist number 16. As this little writing would say, says, this is for new immigrants to the United States or for anybody who speaks English as a second language around the world to become familiar with the federal government of the United States, the Constitution of the United States. And the reason I am doing this is because I think by the end of this century, hopefully sooner, we people of the world have to unite under a federal system and stop warmongering and spending all our money and energy on armament, military. This way we can prosper, live up to our full potential as human beings, see each other as brothers and sisters, regardless of whichever part of this planet we come from, what our first language is, what our religion is, what our backgrounds is. And I think to learn the federal system of the United States, you have to understand and read the Federalist Papers. In these 85 papers, explain the system. Since it was written 230 years ago, some of the language might be a little difficult even for English speakers right now that do not know the background of what was happening at the time the Americans revolted against Britain and established this government. So I'm hoping that as we go forward, I can tell you some of this background. I can also refer you to videos and audio material and books that you can sit and at your convenience watch and listen or read and become more knowledgeable as we go along. So I am actually in reading the last paragraph of Federalist number 16. And again, if you're new to this series, this is the first time or second time you're watching these videos, please go to part 1. Start at the beginning, because it makes more sense if you do it that way. If you don't know American history, these are not going to make sense if you just come in and start in the middle. So go to part 1, and over there in that video I say why I'm doing this project, and then I believe in part 6 I start with Federalist number 1 and read it paragraph by paragraph and try to explain it to you. So this last paragraph we stopped at where it says, as to those partial commotions and insurrections which sometimes disquiet society from the intrigues of an inconsiderable faction or from sudden or occasional ill humors that do not infect the great body of the community, the general government could command more extensive resources for the suppression of disturbances of that kind that would be in the power of any single member. Notice how he says it. He says partial commotions and insurrections. Well, if there's a little insurrection, a little rebellion, just like they had in Western Massachusetts, called Shays' Rebellion. And he refers it as almost like, he says that in fact the great body of the community, he tells a community is like a body of a human being. And he says ill humors attack it. That means a sickness. Like when your body gets sick, you take medicine, you rest, you treat it, or do whatever it takes. And here he says, if there's a rebellion, if there's an insurrection, and part of the body, part of the state has gotten sick, then the national government, the federal government, if we are united, can actually put down this rebellion much easier than the state government could. Because the national government would have greater resources, more money, more soldiers, more ammunition, more guns. So it says this is another good reason for us to unite. And as to those mortal feuds which in certain conjectures spread a conflagration through a whole nation, or through a very large proportion of it, proceeding either from weighty causes of discontent given by the government, or from the contagion of some violent popular praxisism, they do not fall within any ordinary rules of calculation. When they happen, they commonly amount to revolutions and dismemberment of empire. No form of government can always avoid either, no form of government can always either avoid or control them. He says there are situations, sometimes he's being very, very realistic. When he says feuds, he's talking about wars. He says there might be struggles and wars at some time in the future that we're hoping won't happen, but if they happen and we don't have a strong union, it is natural for these feuds to become bigger wars, and as they get bigger and spread like wildfire, see, it uses the word conflagration. It's almost like a fire that you start and then all of a sudden spreads without you being able to control it. So she says there are times that these feuds, these wars, might start between different parts of the union, and if the union is weak, it might just spread like out of control fire, and there's nothing anybody can do. And then a big country, when he says empire, excuse me, he's most of the time he's referring to a vast country or vast land, big country, big land. So here it says a big country will be dismembered, like body parts will fall apart, and the union will break apart. So he's constantly reminding the readers that if you do not have a strong union, all these little fights between communities, between the states, might just like a fire that is not immediately controlled, that is not immediately put out, might just spread like wildfire, and it would be hard to control it. It is in vain to hope to guard against events too mighty for human foresight or precaution, and it would be idle to object to a government because it could not perform impossibilities. He's being very realistic. He says there comes a time, if you don't have good planning, if you have not prepared for it, it is prideful and stupid to think that once these fires start, once they get out of hand, out of control, that you can put it out. And he uses these metaphors, these symbols, to say we can be smart and form this union so that unfortunate things won't happen to us, because we have thought ahead of time, we have planned for it, and we are going to be realistic. Because during these papers, as you have noticed and will notice, they are very realistic about human nature. They don't trust human beings with power. And that's why they are setting the system the way they are. Because they say, we know for sure that, for example, somebody as good as George Washington is not going to be our president at all times. Because at that time, when they were writing the Constitution, they were almost positive that the first person that was going to become the president of the United States, that would get everybody's vote, that everybody trusted, would be George Washington. But they were thinking, so what after Washington? We don't know who it's going to be. So we're going to create a system, devise a system, plan it in a way to assume that the president after Washington is just going to be just like any other human being. It's going to be prideful, ambitious, wants everything for himself, his family, and a small group of people. So we have to devise the system that will have checks and balances and division of powers, so we can actually establish a long-lasting republic, one that will not be looked at as a joke in the history of mankind.